Hello, I'm Phil Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and welcome to my blog, where I share my creative journey and highlight the various things that I learned along the way as obstacles come up, and also, share the various techniques that I've learned from my past that I'm also applying in those certain situations. Now, if you've been following me for the past couple of weeks, you know that overall I haven't been as creative as I could be, and perhaps that's the wrong term, simply because there's a lot going on in the world and I've chosen to kind of focus on that more. And I'm going to talk about that idea, but I will talk about the creative aspects of my past week right now and use that as a kicking off point. So first off, last week I got the sound back for my film, and this was version 4, if we're going to call it that. And I mentioned last week that I would listen to it across multiple platforms and ways. So I listened to it as an audio podcast on my TV, on my iPad, things of that nature, right? And I also shared it with friends that I trust to get their feedback. And the good news is the feedback came back and they overall not only enjoyed the film, but the sound wasn't jarring for them. So that was really good. That eased me up a lot because, I thought there would be a lot more work to do. But actually, as I watched it, throughout the various ways that I said I would, I started noticing it actually flows pretty well. And when you listen to it as just kind of a movie, you get sucked into it. Now, when you're really looking for stuff, yeah, of course, you're going to be able to pick up stuff. But when you really just sit back and enjoy it, there's not a lot there. And so the overall stuff that came back was the volume just needed to be a little bit more consistent at certain points. There was times when something all of a sudden got loud and then got quiet, even within a scene. There was something that we did where there's internal thoughts of a character and we added reverb to it. People said, just bring down the reverb just a smidge. So yeah, that's cool. I never would have known that. It's kind of funny how when you know the lines of dialogue, you can kind of make up for anything because, you already know what they're supposed to be saying. So it sounds very clear to you. And for them, it apparently wasn't. So, minor note, we're just going to take down the reverb just a little bit. Kind of overall make the volume more consistent. And, there's a couple of areas that I nitpick, but, if we just adjust it just a slight, it'll make a huge difference. But even as it is, it's not jarring or distracting. So that's kind of the good news, right? So, I had a great conversation with Edgar, who is doing this phase of the sound design and mix, and who's been really, polishing it up and getting it to the finish line. And he was just wonderful. And it was great to kind of share that moment with him and tell him it's essentially good news, right? So because with each sound pass, you hope to get a little bit closer and the notes get less severe and so forth. And that's the track we've been on. And so now it's really just a true polish as opposed to any major stuff. So that's really cool. The other thing, creatively, because I have my 2 dogs, I have been, I walk them 4 times a day. And for the most part, I've usually listened to podcasts and make calls to friends and things like that. But a couple times last week, I decided, let me just essentially kind of meditate and not really listen to anything. And that was good because, I've been focusing, when I'm not walking my dogs, I've been focusing on other stuff, which again, I'll get to. But I figured, why not utilize the time that I'm walking my dogs to sort of unplug and be creative, right? And so I had a couple of great breakthrough moments with a script that I've been thinking about. There's kind of, it's almost like, like in the Da Vinci Code or things of that nature where they have, this lock and you have to try the combinations and you have to get it just right. It almost storytelling and just any creative endeavor kind of feels like that. You're always tinkering to try to unlock this piece of art, if you will. And and sometimes like one of the things is each sort of phase of whatever the artistic process is kind of like, it's almost like a Russian doll of locks, where you have to figure out the combo for the biggest one, but then within that is a smaller one and a smaller one and a smaller one, right? Until you find the gold, if you will, if you want to track that metaphor in this way. So, I can't say that I've like unlocked the entire story itself, but I did figure out a major piece that was alluding to me that a lot of people have been kind of pinpointing and questioning, like, well, why this? Why this? How do you justify that? And so I think I finally found the overall justification. Of course, the devil is in the detail, and as I move forward, that's where I'm going to have to. It's going to really make or break it, because I could spout ideas for stories all day long, and on surface they could sound great, but without the proper execution, of course, doesn't mean much. So that'll be the next phase of what I try to do and try to work. And I think I talked about this last week, that there's no real ideal day for creativity. And so, I've been trying to just kind of put in, like even 30 minutes a day just towards creativity, just to keep that muscle exercised, and do something for myself. I think I talked a lot in the past about this idea that any social justice movement is always going to be a long-term process, and so you can't, you have to kind of make it part of your everyday routine. You can't just like go nonstop, because eventually you'll burn out. And so, in this way, creativity is my sort of outlet. And so, I've gotten back in the routine. Obviously, I still spend more time on the things that I feel like matter in this moment, but nonetheless, creativity is an outlet for me. And so I try to, even just 30 minutes a day, I think is at least moving the ball forward, as they say. So one of the things, I've referenced David Foster Wallace, and specifically his "This Is Water" speech a bunch of times, if you've been following me for the past 2 years or whatever it may be. I'm a huge fan of this speech, and him in particular. One of the lines in it that he says is the truly important kind of freedom you're not going to hear talked about, and it's the ability to care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in unsexy ways every single day. And I think this is important because, I think I've talked about this as well to some degree, but now I have a new perspective about it, where like a lot of creatives almost looked at quarantine as like, hey, I have this time, so like if I don't finish a book, if I don't finish an album, if I don't finish, writing this or doing that, like, or painting like 12 paintings, whatever it may be, right? Then I'm a failure. And, it's like, by whose definition? There is no timeline. Who's to say like I'm supposed to do X, Y, and Z here? If you look at the grander scope of most successful people's lives, like it's measured in years, not months or even days. And, the amount of work that they do over the course of their lifetime is vast, but, apologies, that's my dog, is really vast, but, it's over long periods of time. And most of them talk about this idea that, they didn't know how certain things would fit. And, I think people think everyone has it more figured out than they really do. And the more I listen to successful people and, on podcasts and so forth, that's just not true. Everyone is ultimately trying to figure it out. And so it really got me thinking, like, based on whose timeline, like, if I don't walk out of, like, once quarantine is fully lifted, which, that's a whole nother thing that I'm going to get into, but, who's to say I have to have, a book done, a movie done, and a script done, right? Maybe that's not the right timeline, right? There's more important things in life sometimes, and you got to recognize them. And I think, I've certainly been okay with it, but now really in kind of thinking about it, I've really kind of solidified it in my own being that, I don't need to hit any sort of deadline because first off, they're my deadlines. But second off, who ultimately cares? There's things that come up every single day. And, I'm not just talking about the Black Lives Matter movement or, COVID or anything like that. I'm talking even just simple things like I have a friend that needed help moving. So I helped. In fact, I had another friend who was moving and they didn't need my help necessarily, but they needed a bigger car. So I said, yeah, take my car. I'm certainly not driving it. Go right ahead. There's friends that call me all the time just to kind of vent, talk, and work through stuff. And I'll pick up, and certainly some of these conversations are like 2.5 hours. And, if I had to meet X, Y, and Z deadline, it's like, okay, yeah, that would be detrimental. But again, based on whose definition? I think we have to be humans first and creative second. Like the art serves our humanity. And, and listen, at the end of the day, this serves me. I know a lot of people in my life, and I've certainly observed people that I don't know who are just very goal-oriented and things like that. I think, for me, it's a fallacy, I think, because, at the end of the day, they're not open to other people helping. And so part of when I say there's no timeline is like, you never know when something that you do for somebody is going to come back in a beneficial way to help you. And I think that's really important. There's stuff that happens to me all the time based on like something that I did as like a throwaway, or for what was a throwaway for me at the time. And it's coming, it all of a sudden means the world to that person. They really remember it. And now they're calling me for an opportunity or something like that. I think that's really awesome. And to the same token, like one of the things I should clarify is as much as I love helping, I have to kind of also prioritize. So certainly like right now, I'm prioritizing my friends. I'm prioritizing the Black Lives Matter movement, things of that nature. And, as much as I would want to help everyone, one of my things is like, I'm very willing to help even strangers who I don't know. But there's also people that I know that just kind of take and never really, I'm not one to keep score, but there is something that becomes abundantly clear when all you do is give and you get nothing return, like that's a scoreboard I can keep track of very easily when like nothing is reciprocated. And it's always like, hey, Phil, I need this. Hey, Phil, can you help me with this? And, the irony of ironies, there's a lot of times like, I will advise and I'll give, what's interesting to me, like, people come up to me, and I know like everything that I try to advise on, I always try to make it as cheap as possible for the other person and based on the things that I know. And so there was a couple of people just in the past week that, I gave advice to, and it was almost like part of my mantra of how to keep things cheap is, you unfortunately kind of gotta put the work on yourself. And not necessarily from a technical standpoint, but just of like, if you want certain fonts, if you want, certain images or certain look, the more you let someone else kind of dictate that, then it becomes kind of a guessing game for them. Versus if that's how I've kept everything cheap that I've done, whether through my time at AfterBuzz, now whether with my own stuff, certainly my film, is I make it as specific as I can of what I'm looking for. So all they have to do is just apply their technical ability. And yes, I want their creative input as well. And, going back to the idea of the sound mix and design for the movie, my movie specifically, Idol, I was very specific with Edgar in terms of what I wanted. But because of that, he then took all that specificity and added onto it, right? So he wasn't having to come up with anything and interpret what my overall vision was. I gave him my vision, and now he's just layering it in and adding on top of that and taking it to the next level. So that's what you want someone to really do. And the more specific you are, the cheaper it will be for you, because then they're having to spend less time working on that project, right? But anyway, the point of it all being was, even like what's ironic about the people that just take, they couldn't even take that free stuff because it wasn't to their liking. So it was kind of interesting to me in that sense. And, doesn't mean I regret giving the advice, doesn't mean I feel like it was a waste of my time. But it just is interesting to know. And, I'm going to certainly kind of continue doing what I do and giving the advice that I give. And, but at the same time, after a certain point, if they kind of keep going, I'll say like, I'm just busy at the moment, to the same token. But it's always been my mantra to help, and I'm certainly going to continue in that vein. The other kind of thing that I've been thinking about, specifically because it's something that Rachel Brathen, who is Yoga Girl, talks about, and the reason why this has been in my mind is because she has a podcast that I edit. In fact, she has two. She has Yoga Girl Conversations from the Heart, which is a weekly series, an in-depth kind of series. And then there's a daily podcast called Yoga Girl Daily. And one of the things that she's been talking about and kind of really grappling with is this idea of listening to our bodies more. And this kind of ties in nicely of the no timeline thing, is because I think too often times when we have deadlines, we just go and work ourselves to the point of burnout. Actually, quite a lot of us. It's certainly, if you look at the statistics and things like that, and if nothing else, I can, from my own past, I've certainly burned myself out multiple times. In fact, one time in particular was very devastating. But, it's because we don't listen to our bodies enough. We try to, kind of be like, no, I have X, Y, and Z to do, and like being tired is not important. And she's taught, like, what a novel idea, as she was kind of pointing out, of like, if you're tired, sleep. And I've kind of been adhering to that more and more, and just kind of seeing how that goes. Now, for the most part, I'm still remaining as productive as certainly based on my to-do lists, because in the time that I work on things, I'm focused and things like that. As I said, certainly when people call me or I have to do X, Y, and Z for friends as favors, certainly that kind of shifts the timeline and things like that. But nonetheless, I'm much more rested, and so in those moments I do those things. And some things, not everything. Like if I have a list of, let's say, 5 things, do they get overall done that day 100%? Not necessarily. But I certainly have overall goals for the week of like, these are my must hits, and by the end of the week I do hit them. So that's really cool. So yeah, what a novel idea. Just listen to your body more. And start with, like, specifically, if you have to rest. And see where that takes you. The other thing that kind of came to mind that I heard before, but has kind of really resurfaced. So I was listening to a friend of mine, and he's in his late 20s, and he's very educated, very smart, but it can come off as very abrasive, stubborn, and kind of like a know-it-all, and doesn't leave a lot of room for other people to join the conversation. And the thing that I'd heard before is that knowledge is kind of like an island. The more, like, when you don't have a lot of knowledge, your island is small. The more knowledge you gain, the bigger your island becomes, and it's just you on this island, right? And that's great. I'm a big advocate of knowledge and learning and so forth. However, what you also must realize is the bigger your island becomes, the more points of entry you can be attacked on. And I'm not saying that in like a violent sort of way, but yeah, people can start to nitpick, because there's, all of a sudden the more you know, it's like it just leaves more room for exposure. And I think that was what was missing from his knowledge base, was this idea, he thought, like, because of all the things he knew, he was always going to be right. when in fact, it's like that adage you hear from a lot of people, like I know nothing type of thing, right? The more I know, the less I know. It almost sounds like an oxymoron, but it's really not, because the smarter you become, you start to realize, and you have to know, like, you have to start seeing your blind spots. And you have to recognize that you do have blind spots, and if you are so steadfast just based on everything that you've learned, that this is the absolute truth, it doesn't make it very pleasant for others, and certainly doesn't make it pleasant for you. So I think you have to not be rigid in your thinking. You have to always be striving, and just because you know something, it's like, okay, well, what don't I know? Equally as important about what you know is also what don't you know? So really be cognizant of your blind spots in that way. To that point, kind of related, one of the things that I learned last week that I thought was very powerful was how to really look at privilege. So the technique, as it is to look at yourself and what are all the things you identify as, right? And so for me, well, okay, I'm a male, I'm white, and I'm human, I could throw in maybe I'm a Democrat, things of that nature, right? But if I'm being truthful, I probably wouldn't come up with a long list, because it's like, well, I could say all those things, but, really at the end of the day, I'm just human, right? This is what's something I would say. And then step 2 is to then take that list and be like, okay, now what are all the things that I haven't identified as? And the reason for this is because the list of things that you haven't identified as is really the list of your privilege. So even, I was talking with my friend Courtney Stewart, who is a woman, but she's straight, right? And I said, on your list, you didn't put that you're straight, because it's not something that you have to walk in with and, into a room. It's not something that you have to kind of be mindful of. And I thought that like, and the way we talked about it, I'm always, part of the reason why I do the various lessons that I do is because it allows me, by talking about the things that I learned, it allows me to process them and implement them into my life a little bit easier, because if you can teach it, you can understand it. And so by really talking it out with her in that way, and she really got the point, and B, it further illustrated to me of like, wow, all the things you don't list on your initial identification list really are your points of privilege. And it's true, even someone like Courtney, who is a black woman, yeah, she doesn't have to, identify. She is straight, and so that's something that like she doesn't have to face, right? In our society, and so forth. So it's kind of really interesting, and it really got me thinking about my own privileges, honestly, which are vast. I'm a white man. So my privilege is truly vast. But I think that like and people always say like check your privilege, or like know that you have privilege. And this was one of the first ways that really, just took it to the next level, to the core of like, okay, what really is my privilege? And so, I would invite you to explore that for yourself, because I think it is powerful. So then now kind of moving on to another topic. The other thing that I've been sort of doing, which has been an ongoing thing, is doing more reading. I try to read. I've been trying to be better at waking up and not checking social media first. So I try to, reading for me is enjoyable. So I'll try to read at least like 30 minutes in the morning after I walk my dogs, just to kind of, set myself right. And then before I go to bed, because, they say don't watch TV before you go to bed because it messes with you. So I try to read instead. So I've been doing a lot more reading. As I said in weeks prior, I've been doing a lot more creative reading, because I think, reading in general fosters empathy and so forth. And so by reading the books that I've been reading, they're fiction, but nonetheless, hopefully, I am identifying myself in some of the characters and kind of learning and saying things. And then, I'm using like podcasts and things that I watch for more of nonfiction. And speaking of no timelines, one of the things we're not hitting like a second wave, but I feel like we're about to hit a second wave of quarantine. And so I'm mentally trying to prepare myself, and it's kind of funny, like I look back on it, I really, I kind of thought in my heart of hearts that by July, things wouldn't be normal, but we would certainly be in a far better place. And when you look at like Europe, and they're certainly in a far better position than us as Americans are. And I really thought that by like 4th of July, I would get to do something a little bit more fun than spending time by myself or like, with a very limited amount of people without, and not that I was like looking for a rager of like 200 people, but, even just the idea nowadays of like 20 people in any given room is like, whoa, that's, and yeah, we've essentially we're about to be hitting the reset button. It almost feels like a video game, I'd say like a Grand Theft Auto where you restart a mission, but because you like ultimately failed the mission the first time, you lose a lot of your money. That's what this kind of feels like. It's like, oh, we didn't get quarantined right the first time. We really messed up, so we're gonna give this a second go. And I really hope that as a society we have learned a lot, that we've at least learned something. So then, in this kind of as we're opening things up, but like we're opening things up now, everything's like getting back to shut down. But so as like we enter a second quarantine, not a second wave, a second quarantine, that really took the lessons. I think it all starts with us as individuals to take responsibility for ourselves. And obviously it's shitty when others don't because of how greatly it affects, the country. But yeah, I think we're not out of the woods on this one, and being frustrated and wanting it to be over is not the same as it being over. And so that's something that I'm preparing myself, and I invite you to do the same, because it's certainly I don't think it's going to be a while before it gets better again. Is my prediction. I hope that I'm wrong, but by all accounts, that's not going to be the case. Sorry to kind of leave you on a dire note, but the good, I hope that you keep staying safe and use this as an opportunity to continue educating yourself about the social injustices of our country, to educate yourself just in general of skills and talent, and to work on your creativity. I think all those things, just because I think both things can be true. You can be saddened for what's going on, but at the same time, you don't have to be blind to it, but you can utilize the time that you're given. So I think use that as a takeaway, if nothing else, and I will too. Anyway, thank you for joining me on my vlog. I hope that you have gained something from this. By all means, comment down below. If you have a question or thoughts of your own, I'd be happy to converse, or hit me up on social media if that's easier for you. I'm at Svitek. Would love to chat with you. And as always, if there's any lessons that you want me to talk about in future episodes, happy to do so. Just let me know what they are. I really want to be a resource for you. That's why I do what I do. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to tune in. I really appreciate you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time.